We move now to Mr. Leo Johnson, who is the Executive Director of Empowered Squared, a charitable organization that promotes access to education in Liberia. He is also a member of the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. Leo arrived in Canada as a young refugee 13 years ago after living 9 years in a refugee camp. And since he dedicates his work to understanding the migration experiences of young people with an emphasis on their integration. So, how can governments and the society promote and harness young migrants' contributions to develop in both their countries of origin and destination? Based on your personal migration experience and the remarkable work you promoted for the benefit of the society and young people both in Canada and Liberia, could you please share with us some of the best practices, challenges, and recommendations for young people and the governments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was in 2006 when I landed on the shores of Canada, and I quickly realized as an unaccompanied minor that everything was set up to support families, and adults were relied upon to gather the information because it was assumed that the young people would be supported. And I quickly realized I was left out because arriving there without family, without any adult as a young child, I realized I didn't really have much to turn to, and that led me into a few things. The first thing it led me into, Canada is an incredibly diverse country, so I was able to identify people in my community who looked like me, spoke some of the languages that I spoke, and to connect with them. But something critical happened, and which I believe happens with a lot of migrant youth. I saw an opportunity for once in my life that I had something to offer. For anyone who's been a migrant youth on the run, especially in the refugee class, for many, many, many years in your life, you are only on the receiving end. People just gave you stuff all the time, and you depend on them. And for once, I felt like I had something I could offer. And I was using some of the resilience and skills that we learned on the refugee camp to help deal with some of the situations around the experiences of migrant youth in Canada. So what I did, it's a crazy idea. My second year in Canada, I said I'm going to start an organization because everybody I turned to help felt it was too difficult to tackle the problem. You had to go through many layers of government and ministries. So I said, okay, I'll just do it myself. And we started and focused exclusively on how, I like to call them newcomers. For some reason, I'm not too comfortable using the term migrant just because of all of the politics around it. So I like to call them newcomers. Our emphasis was focused on how newcomers, young newcomers, were integrating and what skill sets and strength and experiences they were bringing. And in that process, we learned a few things. And the first thing we learned was education upskilling. I've heard a lot of people talk about education here, but what we haven't taken into consideration is that education policies in countries are very unique, and they do not take into consideration the gap and disruption in the education of migrant youth most of the time. They assume that you should just continue from where you stop, or sometimes you should have kept going. We also look at information literacy, something that is really important. Many times it's not because migrant youth don't have the ability to adapt, but because they don't have access to the right information that is contextualized to what they're actually dealing with. And the next thing we look at, especially for the countries of origin, I often say migrant youth don't find space when they go back to their countries of origin because of the class politics in many of our countries. If you were not from a high socioeconomic class in your country of origin, regardless of how much you do, when you go back, you often don't tend to get the access. Even trying to meet your ministers or trying to meet your government officials is impossible to talk about making change. So I'm happy that the IOM actually reached out and is trying to find opportunities to engage with migrant youth in the diaspora because I believe some of those doors can be open. I also want to encourage member states that when they come to these conferences and when you come to the diaspora, finding unique opportunities to connect with their diaspora, especially of young people who have come here regardless of their social class, regardless of their last names and regardless of which families they come from, looking for unique opportunities to cultivate some of that talent that exists in the diaspora. I think one thing we also forget in terms of policy changes, I will suggest, would be around asking host countries to look at their foreign policies in the eyes of their diasporan communities. Most often, we are implementing foreign policies in these countries where we have a lot of diaspora youth from, exclusive of them. We are not involving them, when the truth is, it's a unique opportunity to drive smart foreign policy goals when we can cultivate the diaspora of the very countries around the world that we are trying to support using diaspora and youth. So my advice, and in terms of what we've learned over the last 10 years, has actually led me to going back to my own country of Liberia and spearheading a project that's estimated at $2 million, building a learning center that will house the first public library in the country. I couldn't find anybody to give me money, so I decided I would raise the money myself if nobody's going to give it to me. Went back to my own country, could not get access to my very government officials whom I'm trying to help deal with the problems they're struggling with. So I decided I would force the agenda and I wouldn't stop. It took 7 years for me to get to talk to the right people to get this project going. So as an example, I will hope host countries can use some of the influence they have in those local countries to open doors and open opportunities for young people who are already out there finding the resources and the means to bring change back home.
Thank you very much. Very interesting experience. You're a member of the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. Could you present how the council engages youth and young migrants in its work?
Yeah, so Hamilton in Canada has done some incredible work around this. The city decided that we should bring together all of the players and stakeholders directly working with young people, especially, we call them newcomers, whether immigration, economic class or refugee class. And bringing those stakeholders around the table allow us to really understand the frustration and challenges they are dealing with without the fear of them thinking we are their funders and they don't want to be challenging some of the status quo that we've been dealing with. But what it also did was it identified champions within the migrant youth community as well. Just so we want them sitting at those tables and not just having the agencies bring their voices. We want them there and we want them to get the same space like everybody else. Further to that, mentorship was key. Because if you bring a bunch of young people in the room, first of all, they are very intimidated to all the processes and the jargons that are used in these meetings. So how do you facilitate the process of it becoming comfortable for them to feel like they can participate? So finding unique mentors within the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council that had the responsibility to work with these youth members to help them understand, feel comfortable. How do you approach the issues? How do you craft your ideas in a way that when you bring it to the table, people will be forced to listen to the agenda? That has been key for someone like me to be sitting on the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, which I joined after being 4 years in Canada, was practically impossible many years back because I didn't understand what was happening. But having access to mentorship allowed me to feel confident enough that I could go to the room, I could participate, and my voice will be heard because I had the tools to bring it forward. So the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council is using a two-pronged approach. One is bringing in the stakeholders and service providers to say, we want to talk to you. And two is bringing in the recipients themselves of the services, which are the young people, to say, we want you at the table so that you can also challenge some of the things we're hearing, but you can also provide your direct input to what should be happening. But I wanted to just mention a few things. When we talk about migrant youth in general, something I haven't heard around the age bracket that we've given what we define as migrant youth, from 15 to 29 in some cases. However, what we've often seen is that the level of maturity that we're seeing from people who are migrant youth is sometimes beyond the 40 and 50-year-olds. So we are designing programs that suit your average 15 to 29-year-olds when they're sitting there and thinking to themselves, why are you doing this to me? Some of them are already carrying the burden of sustaining their households. Some of them are already the only member of the family that is looked up to take care of everybody, but we treat them like the average 15 to 24 years old, 29 years old, when the truth is the level of sophistication and complexities they're dealing with is far beyond what we're actually dealing with. Another issue is around the pressure to work. We often talk about jobs, and what we often fail to realize is that the quality and level of time you require to acquire the education or training you need to function properly in our society, especially developed economies, is very sophisticated than just getting a job. So what often happens is that migrant youth end up in precarious work that often undermine their ability to be successful in their host countries compared to the kind of jobs that they should be competing for if they have access to the level and time of training and education that's actually required. Another thing is also the definition of youth versus the reality of their responsibility. It's about time that local authorities start to look at youth based on the context of their experiences compared to saying what we consider as youth between the ages of 15 to 29 in the United States or in Canada or in Norway compared to someone coming from sub-Saharan Africa, which is much, much different in realities. Non-binding agreements as well. I always get the creep when I hear about our agreements being non-binding because I think we need to push governments and local authorities much more to find ways of enacting framework that will require some accountability. It's okay to have the non-binding agreement, but what good it is if the local authorities are not enacting the frameworks that will allow them to say, yes, we are making every effort that we can to the best of our ability to live up to those agreements, even though they are non-binding. And I will wrap up by talking about migrant youth being used as scapegoats for failures
of wrap up.
Yeah, for failures of local governments. The failure of local governments to deal with the issues in their countries, it's become so easy to blame migrant youth as the problem, as the reason why all of these things are happening. And I would like to see the difference between economic migrants and humanitarian migrants, because people assume that economic migrants are wealthy people. When I know that some of my friends who are economic migrants, the entire village had to sell everything they had to send one son somewhere to try and become successful so that they can actually help them. Thank you. I just want to close by giving a little bit of caution, because throughout the day I heard a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship, and it's become this new beautiful thing that's putting a lot of pressure on migrant youth. As great as entrepreneurship is, it's not for everyone. To become an entrepreneur requires a disciplined set of skills and resilience. And it's not everyone that will be an entrepreneur. So I just want to caution all of us, as much as we all love it, it's not for everybody. And that would bring me to conclude by saying, I've lived it myself developing Empowerment Square as an organization. It took me 10 years of quitting 2 jobs after graduating school before being able to take the first salary at my job, because I wanted to be a social entrepreneur. And through that effort today, I can say in Canada, we employ many migrant youth who work for us now in full-time livable jobs, but also we are able to now extend our reach beyond the borders of Canada back to our countries of origin to start to have some real impact in ways that even our governments can begin to appreciate. So I want to sum this up by saying, let's be cautious as much as we want to support migrants, our migrant youth. Let's be cautious of putting all these unnecessary pressures on them when we all know that many of them became adults at age 5, age 6, age 7. They skipped the entire teenage time of their life and became adults right away. And we're trying to support them in ways that makes it look that their lives were normal and they develop. So I want to thank the IOM. The last time I interacted with the IOM was leaving Ghana as a refugee with my little IOM bag. I never thought 13 years later I would be sitting here. So I want to be grateful for the opportunity that I can sit here and provide some suggestions and ways in which we can work with young people. And I challenge the IOM that the conversation should not end with a handful of us showing up on this podium, that it will be continuous and we will look for ways to engage.
Lovely. What a beautiful conclusion.